Stop scrolling. What you're about to hear is not motivational, and it's not comforting. The first week of February is not just another phase, it's a turning point most people won't survive consciously. Something has already started shifting. If you feel pressure, confusion, or a quiet sense of urgency you can't explain, this is why. This isn't for everyone. It's for the ones who noticed something was off and didn't look away. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this week changes everything, and why going back won't feel possible anymore. Stay with me, because once you see this, you can't unsee it. The week that doesn't announce itself. No one circles it on a calendar. There is no alarm, no cosmic siren, no headline scrolling across the sky that says, "This is it." That's the first trick of the first week of February. It arrives quietly, almost politely, as if it were just another stretch of days you're meant to sleepwalk through. But this week is different. Not because something happens on the outside, because something locks on the inside. Most people never notice the moment it begins. They wake up tired, scroll their phones, replay old worries, repeat the same emotional loops. From the surface, nothing has changed. The world still looks stable enough, familiar enough, safe enough. Yet underneath that thin layer of routine, something ancient shifts its weight. The first week of February is not a beginning, it's a turning point. A pressure point in time where momentum changes direction whether you agree with it or not. A hinge, a quiet hinge that decides which doors will open later and which ones will never open at all. Here's the part no one warns you about. You don't get asked if you're ready. During this week, the background noise of life grows strangely louder. Thoughts you've been avoiding resurface without permission. Emotions you thought you'd processed come back sharper, heavier, more demanding. Patterns you've tolerated for years suddenly feel unbearable, like wearing a coat that no longer fits your skin. This is not coincidence. This is calibration. Something is measuring you, not in words, not in actions, but in resonance, in what you tolerate, in what you keep returning to, in what you secretly believe you deserve. And here's the unsettling truth. The first week of February doesn't respond to effort. It responds to alignment. You can work harder and still feel stuck. You can stay busy and still feel behind. You can do everything right and sense that something is quietly slipping away. That feeling is the signal. Because this week isn't about what you do, it's about what you anchor. Every person carries an internal point of stability, a core belief, a default emotional state, an unspoken agreement with life. For some, it's hope. For others, it's fear dressed up as realism. For many, it's survival masquerading as ambition. During this week, that anchor is exposed. You may notice it when plans stall without explanation, when conversations feel heavier than usual, when people reveal sides of themselves that force you to see the truth you've been skirting around. When small decisions suddenly feel loaded, like they matter more than they should. They do. Because the first week of February compresses time. What would normally unfold over months begins to condense. Consequences move closer. Patterns accelerate. The distance between intention and outcome shortens. This is why some people feel energized this week, clear, focused, strangely calm despite the pressure, and why others feel irritated, restless, anxious, or inexplicably tired. Same days, same dates, completely different experiences. The difference isn't luck, it's orientation. Those who are aligned with where they're meant to go feel the tension as propulsion. Those who aren't feel it as resistance, like pushing against a door that is no longer meant to open. And here comes the twist no one talks about. This week doesn't punish misalignment. It reveals it. You're shown, sometimes gently, sometimes brutally, what no longer matches the person you are becoming, not the person you say you want to be. the person you are already in the process of becoming, whether you admit it or not. That's why avoidance feels more exhausting than action right now. That's why distraction stops working. That's why the usual comforts feel hollow. The week is asking a single, uncomfortable question. What are you standing on when everything else starts to move? Most people answer unconsciously. They cling to old identities, old fears, old narratives. They double down on what once kept them safe. And when things begin to unravel later, they swear it came out of nowhere. It didn't. This was the moment the path split. Because what you stabilize during this week, what you emotionally, mentally, and spiritually lock into place, becomes the reference point for everything that follows. The opportunities that appear, the doors that stay shut, the intensity you can handle, the truth you can no longer unsee. The first week of February doesn't chase you. It doesn't beg. It doesn't explain itself. It simply passes and takes notes. And if you're feeling a subtle pressure right now, an unease you can't quite name, a sense that something important is hovering just out of sight, it's not because something is wrong. It's because you've reached the turn. And whether this becomes the week that changes everything, or the week you later realize you missed, depends on what you choose to anchor before it ends. The pressure that separates the real from the rehearsed. By the second half of the week, something becomes impossible to ignore. The pressure changes texture. It's no longer a vague sense of unease or quiet anticipation. It sharpens, focus narrows. Situations that once felt neutral begin to carry weight, as if they're testing something beneath the surface of your choices. People start reacting to you differently. Conversations feel more revealing, even when nothing dramatic is said. This is where the first week of February stops being subtle. Because once the turning point is crossed, the week stops asking who you want to be and starts observing who you actually are when it costs you something. Here's the twist. The pressure isn't external. It doesn't come from circumstances, deadlines, or other people. Not really. Those are just the delivery system. The real pressure is internal alignment coming into conflict with internal resistance. This is the moment where rehearsed identities begin to crack. The version of yourself you perform for the world, the responsible one, the agreeable one, the endlessly patient one, starts to feel unsustainable. Not because it's false, but because it's incomplete. It was built for an earlier chapter of your life, and now it can't carry the weight of what's trying to emerge. That's why irritation flares faster than usual. That's why old coping mechanisms fail. That's why silence feels heavier than noise. The week is compressing choice. During this phase, time behaves differently. Delays feel intolerable. Waiting feels dangerous. You may notice an almost physical urge to decide something, even if you don't know what the decision is yet. This is not impatience. It's momentum demanding direction. And this is where many people make a critical mistake. They assume the pressure means something is wrong. So they numb it, distract it, explain it away. They label it stress, burnout, seasonal fatigue, anything that lets them avoid the deeper truth. Something real is trying to replace something familiar. But pressure isn't a threat here. It's a sorting mechanism. The first week of February doesn't reward comfort. It rewards coherence, the alignment between what you believe, what you tolerate, and what you act on. When those three are out of sync, the pressure increases, not to break you, but to expose the fracture. This is why people who've been lying to themselves feel attacked this week. Not by life, but by clarity. Every distraction feels thin. Every excuse sounds hollow the moment it's spoken. Even success can feel strangely unsatisfying, like winning a game you no longer care about. And then come the tests. They don't look like tests. They look like inconveniences, delays, unexpected reactions. Someone challenges you in a way that hits too close to home. An opportunity appears, but asks for a version of you that you're not sure you can sustain. A door opens that would require letting go of a familiar safety net. These moments aren't random. They are diagnostic. They reveal what you're anchored to when the ground shifts: fear or trust, habit or intention, scarcity or expansion. And here's the uncomfortable part. Your body often answers before your mind does. Notice how your nervous system reacts this week: tightening, expanding, freezing, leaning forward, pulling back. These responses are data. They show you what you've trained yourself to expect from life, and whether that expectation is aligned with where you're being pulled. Some people feel a strange calm during this phase, a sense of inevitability that's oddly comforting. Those are usually the ones who've already been living close to their truth, even if imperfectly. For them, the pressure feels like confirmation. Others feel exposed, raw, on edge, as if the walls that once protected them are thinning. For them, the pressure feels like threat. But here's the twist that changes everything. The pressure does not care about your story. It doesn't care how hard you've tried. It doesn't care how much you've endured. It doesn't care how justified your fears feel. It only responds to readiness. And readiness in this week has nothing to do with confidence. It has to do with honesty, radical, uncomfortable honesty about what you can no longer carry forward. This is the phase where people are silently separated, not by talent, intelligence, or effort, but by willingness. Willingness to release an identity that once kept them safe, but now keeps them small. Willingness to disappoint others to remain aligned with themselves. Willingness to step into uncertainty without guarantees. Those who resist this phase often double down on control. They tighten schedules, seek validation, demand certainty. And later, when things unravel more dramatically, they'll say they never saw it coming. But the signs were here. This was the week where the pressure spoke clearly. And if you listen closely, past the noise, past the fear, you may notice something surprising beneath it all. A steady pull. Not pushing you away from your life, but drawing you toward a version of it that requires less performance and more presence. The pressure isn't trying to crush you. It's trying to strip you down to what's real. And once that process begins, there is no returning to ignorance. The moment time stops negotiating. Midweek, something subtle but decisive happens. The noise thins, not externally. Life keeps moving, messages still arrive, obligations still exist. But internally, a line is crossed. The endless internal negotiations quiet down. The maybe later, not yet. When things calm down, narratives lose their grip. This is the moment when time stops bargaining with you. Up until now, you may have believed you were waiting for the right conditions, more clarity, more energy, more certainty. But during this phase of the first week of February, it becomes painfully clear. The conditions were never the gate. You were. And here's the twist most people miss. Nothing new actually arrives in this moment. What changes is perception. You suddenly see what has been circling you for a long time, quietly patient, waiting for you to stop looking away. This is why the realization often feels abrupt, even shocking. A truth lands without warning. A pattern becomes obvious in hindsight. A choice you thought was complex reveals itself as simple but costly. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is where the turning point earns its name. Because from here on, pretending not to know becomes heavier than acting. Ignorance, once comfortable, turns corrosive. The mind may try to argue, but the body knows. There's a distinct sensation that accompanies this phase, a tightening followed by an unexpected clarity, like exhaling after holding your breath for years. This is also where many people misinterpret what's happening. They think they're being forced into change. They're not. What's actually happening is the removal of plausible deniability. You can no longer claim confusion. The week doesn't demand immediate action, but it demands recognition. And Recognition alone shifts the timeline of your life, because now every delay becomes a decision. This is why relationships feel different during this phase. Certain conversations feel overdue. Certain dynamics feel suddenly fragile. You may notice that some people instinctively pull away, not because you've changed yet, but because you're no longer unconsciously agreeing to remain the same. Your energy stops cushioning other people's expectations, and that's unsettling for them and for you. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. This phase isn't dramatic on the surface. There are no fireworks, no external confirmation. In fact, it can feel eerily quiet. But internally, a recalibration is underway. The future you've been inching toward starts accelerating, not through effort, but through alignment. This is when intuition sharpens. You start sensing outcomes before they unfold. You feel which paths are dead ends without needing proof. You notice when something is being offered to you as a test rather than a gift. And perhaps most unsettling of all, you feel when something is ending, even if it hasn't ended yet. This awareness can feel isolating. Others may not see what you see. They may still be operating on timelines that no longer resonate with you. Their advice, once helpful, now sounds outdated. Their fears feel familiar, but no longer persuasive. This isn't arrogance, it's perspective-shifting altitude. At this stage, the week introduces a quiet challenge. Can you sit with knowing without rushing to resolve it? Can you allow clarity to exist without immediately packaging it into action, explanation, or announcement? Most people can't. They rush to do something, anything, to release the tension. They announce changes prematurely. They burn bridges impulsively. They mistake awareness for urgency. But the deeper work here is restraint, because this moment isn't about movement yet. It's about ownership. Owning what you know. Owning what you feel. Owning the fact that your life cannot continue on autopilot, not because it's failing, but because you've outgrown its current settings. This is the phase where power quietly returns, not the loud, performative kind, but the internal authority that comes from no longer outsourcing your direction to circumstance, approval, or fear. You realize that waiting has been a choice all along, and so has staying. And with that realization comes an uncomfortable freedom. Because if you're the one who's been choosing, then you're also the one who can choose differently. This is where many people feel a strange grief, not for what they've lost, but for how long they postponed what they already knew. That grief is not a setback. It's a release, a recognition of time reclaimed. The turning point doesn't shout. It whispers something far more dangerous to the old version of you. You're ready now. And once that truth lands, the rest of the week rearranges itself around it, whether you resist it or not. The collapse that reveals what was always holding you. By the time the week begins to close, something gives way. Not dramatically, not all at once, but unmistakably. A structure you didn't realize you were leaning on, an assumption, a role, a routine, a belief about how things have to be, starts to fail. It might wobble before it falls. It might soften rather than shatter, but the effect is the same. You can no longer rely on it the way you once did. This is where many people panic. They interpret the collapse as loss. But this chapter isn't about what's breaking. It's about what remains standing when the support is gone. Here's the twist. The collapse doesn't come from chaos. It comes from precision. The week doesn't tear down everything, only what no longer carries truth. The things that fall apart now were already unstable. They just hadn't been challenged yet. And now, they are. You may notice this as disappointment. Something you expected to work doesn't. Something you hoped would last changes. Someone you relied on reveals a limit. A plan that once felt solid suddenly feels hollow. The instinct is to fix it, to restore the familiar, to rebuild the structure exactly as it was. But that urge is the final test, because this collapse isn't an invitation to repair, it's an invitation to reroute. Without the old support, you're forced to feel what's actually underneath you. And what surprises most people is that the ground doesn't disappear. In fact, it's firmer than expected, quieter, more stable. This is the moment where false strength gives way to real strength. False strength depends on certainty, validation, and repetition. Real strength depends on presence, on the ability to stand without needing immediate reassurance, on trusting your internal signal even when the external environment hasn't caught up yet. During this phase, your relationship with control changes. You realize how much energy you've spent trying to manage outcomes, anticipating reactions, preventing discomfort, minimizing risk. And as the collapse unfolds, you see that control never actually protected you. It only delayed the inevitable reckoning. What protects you now is something different: discernment. You start recognizing what deserves your energy and what doesn't. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing clarity from people who can't offer it. You stop mistaking familiarity for safety. This is where the story quietly reverses. What looked like loss becomes relief. What felt like instability becomes freedom. What seemed like an ending reveals itself as an unclenching. And yet, this phase is not comfortable. There is vulnerability here. Without the old scaffolding, you are visible to yourself, most of all. There's no performance to hide behind, no role to automatically step into. You feel exposed, but also strangely aligned. This is when people discover what they actually trust. Not what they say they trust. Not what they wish they trusted. But what they instinctively lean on when certainty dissolves. Some realize they trust their intuition more than they thought. Others discover they've been relying on anxiety as a form of preparation. Some find that faith, once abstract, suddenly becomes practical. Others realize they've been placing their sense of worth in structures that were never meant to hold it. None of these realizations are gentle, but they are clarifying. As the week draws closer to its end, something subtle happens again. Your tolerance for misalignment drops. Situations that once felt manageable now feel intolerable. Not because they're worse, but because you can no longer pretend they're neutral. This is where boundaries form without effort. You don't need to announce them. You don't need to justify them. They emerge naturally from the recognition of what drains you versus what strengthens you. And this is where the collapse finishes its work. By removing what you leaned on, it reveals what you stand on. Not ambition, not approval, not fear of loss, but something quieter, deeper, more durable. A sense of internal permission. Permission to proceed without waiting for consensus. Permission to choose alignment over appearance. Permission to let the next chapter unfold without demanding to see the entire map. The collapse wasn't punishment, it was calibration. And once calibrated, you don't rebuild the same life. You build from a different center entirely. The week has one final movement left. And it doesn't ask you to become someone new. It asks you to stop abandoning who you already are. The point of no return and why it's a gift. By the end of the first week of February, something irreversible settles in. Nothing explodes. Nothing announces itself. No external authority confirms what has happened. And yet, you know, this is the point of no return. Not because everything has changed, but because you have. Subtly, quietly, permanently. The final phase of this turning point doesn't arrive as action. It arrives as orientation. You notice that your inner compass has locked into place. The constant recalculating, second-guessing, and emotional bargaining has slowed. Not disappeared, but lost its power to override your knowing. This is where many people expect a reward. Clarity, relief, momentum, proof. Instead, What arrives is responsibility. Because now that you see clearly, you can no longer claim you didn't know better. This is the twist no one warns you about. Awakening doesn't make life easier. It makes it honest. And honesty removes the luxury of unconscious living. You realize that from this point forward, every compromise will be felt immediately. Every misaligned choice will echo louder. Every truth ignored will weigh heavier than before. This isn't punishment, it's precision. The week has sharpened your sensitivity, not to make you fragile, but to make you accurate. You're no longer numb enough to tolerate what erodes you slowly. You can still choose comfort over truth, but it will no longer feel neutral. It will feel expensive. This is where power becomes real. Not power over others, not dominance, not control, but authorship. You feel the quiet authority of someone who understands that their life is not something happening to them. It's something unfolding through them. And that realization changes how you stand, speak, and decide. Here's the part that surprises almost everyone. The future doesn't rush in after this moment. It doesn't reward you with instant transformation. Instead, it waits. Because now, the next move must be yours. This is where timelines split. Some people, sensing the weight of this awareness, retreat. They distract themselves. They rationalize. They convince themselves the intensity will pass. And in a way, it does, by dulling again, by re-entering familiar loops. Others do something quieter, braver, and far more consequential. They integrate. They don't announce change. They don't force outcomes. They don't burn everything down. They simply stop lying to themselves. And that single decision, made privately, repeatedly, rewrites the trajectory of their life. You'll notice it in how you spend your energy, in what you no longer chase, in the conversations you don't prolong, in the patience you develop for what is real and the impatience you feel for what is performative. You become harder to manipulate, not because you're guarded, but because you're clear. And clarity is inconvenient to systems built on confusion. This is why, after the turning point, subtle resistance often appears. People question your choices. Situations test your resolve. Old patterns resurface, not because you're failing, but because they're losing relevance and making one last attempt to reassert themselves. This is the final gate. Not a dramatic showdown, but a series of quiet choices where you decide whether to honor what you now know or betray it for comfort. There is no cosmic punishment if you choose comfort, but there is a cost, and now you can feel it. The gift of this week is not certainty, it's congruence. You begin aligning your inner truth with your outer life, not perfectly, not instantly, but deliberately. And once alignment becomes your reference point, everything else reorganizes around it. This is why the first week of February doesn't feel like a beginning or an ending. It feels like a threshold. You're still in the same life, but you're standing in it differently, with your weight distributed more evenly, with your center restored, with your excuses exposed, and your intuition recalibrated. The turning point doesn't ask you to be fearless. It asks you to be honest. And from that honesty, a quieter, more dangerous strength emerges. The kind that doesn't need validation, doesn't rush timelines, and doesn't abandon itself under pressure. Once that strength is online, there is no going back. Not because you can't, but because you won't want to.